Hello everyone, my name is Ahmed and I'm here at SIGCHI to ask who owns the future of work? In other words, who funds and stands to benefit from research on technology and labor? Please find a copy of the slides, speaker notes, transcript, PDF of the paper, and other links at bit.ly/Ahmed-future-of-work. Now, what do I hope to get at by asking this question? I'll begin by emphasizing that this is not an attempt to make researchers feel guilty or bad for taking money from the NSF or other funders, even though I'm about to describe them as fundamentally conservative, right-wing, and an enemy to workers. Instead, I want us to interrogate the underlying ideologies of these funders, because unchallenged, these ideological currents will sweep us on a path serving powerful and moneyed interests, despite the fact that so much research on the future of work is ostensibly performed in the interests of working people. Actually, though, it is only through collective organizing that we can change the trajectory of the future to serve our own interests. Here I'm focusing on the definitions of the future of work held by those with capital, money, holdings, and power, because they inevitably affect the definitions that we hold ourselves, as well as the work that we are encouraged to pursue. I focus on two funders, the United States National Science Foundation and the WorkRise Institute, though there are many others, especially those that are active outside the United States. Let's begin with the NSF. This is a recorded message from Faye Cook, the NSF's Assistant Director for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. She talks about the Future of Work funding program and what it aims to accomplish.
Today, we have a unique opportunity to actively shape that future, to use technology to improve the quality of work and ultimately to increase productivity and economic growth.
Cook tells us the value of research proposals submitted to the Future of Work program will ultimately be judged by whether and how they perpetuate already existing economic relationships. We can confirm this is true by taking a look at some of the program's funded projects, which often aim to create technologies that surveil and track workers' activities, and to increase their job duties. Furthermore, projects are framed in a way that advances specific technology solutions prior to bringing ideas to workers, if workers are consulted at all. So while the NSF frames its funding opportunities as gestures toward a techno-utopian future, think tanks like the WorkRise Institute seem to be concerned with more specific and immediate social problems: income inequality, lack of opportunities for upward mobility, and low wages for Black workers and workers of color. It would, of course, be admirable to push for change on these issues, but in writing this paper, I was struck by the fact that WorkRise is funded by large financial and retail corporations, including MasterCard, Walmart, and General Motors, despite having these ostensibly progressive goals. Adding to the confusion, WorkRise's board members include Michael Strain, a right-wing conservative with the American Enterprise Institute, Bill Dirksen, a former vice president with the Ford Motor Company, and David Rolfe, who, despite being a union leader, has collaborated directly with the CEO of Uber. So why is this happening? Is it that these corporations really have the best interests of workers at heart? I argue that that's clearly not true. This slide shows 3 examples of WorkRise's funders and board members engaging in anti-union activity, just from the past few months. Of course, these are all connected to long histories of worker abuse and surveillance. First, a Newsweek article from December 2021 shows how Walmart uses surveillance technology to bust unions. Second, a post from the worker advocacy group More Perfect Union wrote that despite strong wage growth last year, Walmart refused to raise wages above $12 an hour, which is not enough to live on. Finally, WorkRise board member Michael Strain put out a paper in the right-wing conservative-funded think tank National Bureau of Economic Research. This article held the dystopian title, quote, "How important are minimum wage increases in increasing the wages of minimum wage workers?" Now, throughout all this word salad, the actual function of the paper is to argue against minimum wage increases, suggesting that workers who remain at the same job will simply get a raise regardless of changes to the law. Apparently, we're just meant to trust in the benevolence of business owners to grant raises, rather than compel them to change. But the reality is that corporations ultimately benefit from the ideologies perpetuated through the scholarship and research they fund. Otherwise, they wouldn't fund it. In this case, they benefit when we collectively accept the idea that positive social change is given to us from the top down, rather than created from the bottom up, from workers organizing independently and in opposition to the bosses. In other words, it looks like this. This image shows workers at General Motors assembly plant in Flint, Michigan. These workers manufacture automobiles, and 48,000 of them shut it down in 2019 to protest low pay and rising healthcare costs. In an especially cruel move, GM threatened to cut off healthcare for its workers right after the strike started, but backed off after resistance from the union. This is just one example of many I could show, but the takeaway here is that in order to create lasting structural change in our workplaces, we must organize. Organizing a union is often framed as adversarial rather than collaborative or civil. But in fact, workers coming together in a democratic fashion to collectively determine our future is the most collaborative activity that I can think of. This leads to a different angle from which we can view the future of work. It isn't just a euphemism for the inevitable advancement of technology or a phenomenon to be studied abstractly from a distance. We, tech researchers and practitioners, are workers too, and our fates are bound up with all other workers. Because the future of work doesn't particularly bode well for academic and tech workers. Just look at adjunctification, dwindling opportunities for stable employment, tuition increases, labor abuses committed by major universities, heightened surveillance and union busting. On top of all that, the fruits of our labor are often used to harm working people around the world, as we continue to see the tech industry work arm in arm with the American military-industrial complex to sow destruction around the world. Organizing happens when we form bonds of trust and solidarity between workers within and across our workplaces. And so I want to end by sharing some concrete tools for organizing our workplace, so that we can continue to build the labor movement and take ownership of our collective futures together. Thank you.